don't think anybody's really going to watch this live, but I'm awake. And this is actually my only platform. Interestingly enough, it's when people are leaving this platform. But quite a few months ago, I left Facebook. And at first, yes, it's really interesting. You do experience withdrawal symptoms, if you will, because we've become notorious addicted to this thing we call social media, which has become anything but social. I left Twitter a long time ago. It was still called Twitter then, because years ago it was already evident that hate speech against Jewish people was fine. So long before what some people perceive as the evil of Elon Musk's tyranny over what he has rebranded as X was not what you would call the speaker's corner of the internet, where Jews would have felt safe from hate speech. Left Instagram pretty recently as well, and then LinkedIn. They're all on hibernation because, really, for whatever reason, I feel the need that if people do still want to reach me in some meaningful way through a private message, at least they can. But to engage through social media is anything but. Yet here I am going live on YouTube now for the first time, really, and talking about a subject matter that is obviously still contentious in the best of conversations with people. I live in small town Ontario. I made a conscious decision a long time ago to leave Toronto, at least invest. And then, well, my hand was forced to live here permanently. But I own this home. I'm very proud of that. I've enjoyed living in this small community, and by no means am I saying that with the recent war with Hamas and Israel am I feeling an immediate and impending sense of anti-Semitism here. It's not why I'm broadcasting. Actually, it's mostly been indifference, which one could argue is also enabling, but I don't feel anything like that. People do know I'm Jewish in Marmora, Ontario. If you're unfamiliar, it is the oldest iron mining community in Upper Canada. We're over 200 years old now. Older than Canada itself. Right, before Confederation. So, here I am in this town, and there's a war going on the other side of the world. I've been to Israel before. People ask. I represented Canada in 2017 at the Maccabi Games Men's Masters. Here. It's collected some dust. It's a silver medal. Right there. Something to be proud of. I mean, nobody else really celebrates this accomplishment on my behalf, to my knowledge, so I really hate drawing attention to that, by the way. I don't like drawing attention to myself, contrary to what I'm doing here, but people say I have a voice, but I hate writing. The act of writing, to me, is laboring. And obviously, I'm literate. I have learned words. I can write them, although I have fat thumbs. Also happen to have this. Won a player of the game. That was in the gold medal game against Ukraine. We ended up losing 6-2. The Ukraine was full of professional hockey players, one of which was actually Alexei Zhitnik, former NHL All-Star. The guy can still play. On a very small side note, anybody who's ever played in the National Hockey League is better than anyone you've ever played hockey with, and I mean anyone. And then the rest of the team, composed of guys who played D1, KHL, was an incredible game to watch from the crease. we lost 6-2. I played the game of my life there, and I hate to draw attention again to the individual accomplishments, but hey, again, I don't feel like a lot of other people are celebrating it, but part of my Jewish identity very much is connected to what was accomplished there and representing Canada. It was actually the first time we could use that very famous logo, too. So, what with the recent goings on of the IIHF banning Israeli athletes for security reasons and other sports following suit, well, if you're so concerned about our security, you guys make billions of dollars. I think you can spend a couple of those shekels on added security if you're that concerned about us. Oh, another little footnote on Jewish identity in connection to Israel and its long and storied history, thousands of years, which, by the way, as a footnote, in the description, there's a great link, an ambassador for Israel. His name is Oren, runs Traveling Israel. If you want to see a moderate discuss very matter-of-factly from Israel, that's the source I would go to. And in this storied history of this country, this nation, whether it is the land of Canaan or Israel, Jerusalem has been there the whole time. It is our spiritual and ancestral homeland, our ethnic homeland as Jewish people. And hey, fun footnote, on that last Maccabi hockey note, my last experience in Israel, I won a game in Jerusalem, the first ice hockey game in Jerusalem. So as a team, we won, but hey, when they list the W for goalie, that's my name. So that's kind of cool. And I'll celebrate that. You can fact check that. Who won the very first? It won't even really come up because it's pretty incredible. But I remember, I think it was Bill Jaffe wrote the article about his experience. He's a Jewish athlete from the U.S., and that's actually who we played against in that first game. And he noted it was the first ice hockey game in Jerusalem, not Israel. There's been a facility, it used to be called the Canada Center up in the north, and actually I should give some attention to, I want to call him by his nickname as his last name, but Mike Mazenka, better known as Shaker to us, has run hockey programs up there for years now in Metula. Is a citizen of Israel, speaks fluent Hebrew. He's not Jewish. He's been there for years now. Great ambassador for the game. Israeli hockey actually on the rise. A gentleman from Dallas, Texas, his name's Tal, has helped organize Israeli elite hockey. Yes, there's professional hockey in Israel now. Guys who have played in Europe are making a loop down to Israel before heading back to North America. And they're really getting exposure to Israel. It's incredible. And they all say the same thing. This is the country that we hear so much about? Yes. It's a beautiful place. It's grown a lot. My first trip to Israel was in my 20s. And that was some time ago. I'm 46 now. And I believe I traveled there 20 years ago at this point. So even the growth from that point until now, because my family in the north, in Ramat Yishai, my family working in Haifa, one at the Technion and the other at the University of Haifa. It was incredible to see it then and to see its growth 20 years later when I was playing hockey in Israel. I mean, it's just such a beautiful place. And if you actually go, you could see that. And you would see people who are living harmoniously together if people outside of what are borders, recognized borders, well, people can get along really, really well in Israel, let me tell you. Even in Jerusalem, even walking through the Arab quarter, you can walk through. A shekel's a shekel. They're going to take your shekel. If you want to shop in their store, they don't hate you. You are allowed. Not allowed up mosque, but Like I said, there's a lot more about that with Oren at Traveling Israel. I'm going to give credit where it's due. That's an obligation even in my background. I haven't done one of these videos, really. And like I said, it's an experiment. I'm using YouTube as a platform now because it is longer form. This is something you can digest later. I was live. But I do have a background in radio and television from an accredited university. Now it's the Metropolitan University of Toronto. Great rebrand. But at the time, it was Ryerson Polytechnic University, and in an homage to another Zionist who doesn't happen to be Jewish, or at least he favors Israel in terms of how he views this conflict and has in the past by visiting Israel and Gaza and the West Bank. In the year 2000! Come on, I gotta have some levity here. Yeah, I graduated in the year 2000. People in the industry might say I'm a has-been. I never was, but it doesn't take away from the fact that I still passed with more than a D+. And I can digest media as well as anybody. Media is about language. The manipulation of language. I learned that in grade 10, actually. We're going to cite people. The most important person in my life in terms of education is the late Derek Bowles of Thornley Secondary School. He had, at least at the time, went to Markville and then became railway, my apologies, railway historian, credited one. Historian on Canadian Rail, incredible man. But taught me about media and many others at Thornley. And that led to where my education would go, which didn't really lead down the career path that ultimately I'm responsible for. I've made a lot of mistakes. I guess in a sense, that's another good segue, because what Judaism has taught me over the years for Yom Kippur is atonement. Now, do I observe Yom Kippur anymore? Well, the title, which I've kind of taken a long time to bury in a sense, is I said I'm Jewish, but I don't have a personal God. My personal history, I'm 46, and this will be 40 years since my father passed. So that's 40 years of my life. And then when I was 17, so we'll look at next year, that would be when my mother passed. So going on my 18th birthday year. So needless to say, in my past history, I haven't been given a lot of incentive to think that there's an omniscient being that is in my best interests or look out for my best interests. And you could say that it's a test I really don't care for it. I can't change that circumstance. I can't change that I'm Jewish either. A lot of people these days see us as white colonizers or Caucasian, whatever you want to recognize us as. But at the end of the day, we're Jewish. Yes, I can even trace my lineage back from my father's side, because I chose to take part many, many years ago in what was called the National Geographic Genome Project and recognize the migration patterns of humanity. And turns out, amazingly, get this. So when I grew up, my last name Schwartz is usually a giveaway in North America that you're Jewish. It's a very common last name for Jewish people on this side of the ocean. On the other hand, in a lot of Eastern European countries, notably Germany and Austria, Schwarz means black. So it's not really a guarantee that if you meet somebody in, say, Austria and they say Schwarz, being their last name, Schwarz, depending on your preferred pronunciation, they might not be Jewish. And I'm from neither. Nope. my migration pattern, after we all come from the cradle of life being in Africa, went through Israel, stayed a little while, ultimately ending up in and around the borders of what was the former Czech Republic, Czechoslovakia, we'll call it Czechoslovakia at the time, border with the Soviet Union, Schwarzburg. Interesting footnote. But there's a little historical lineage, but I can trace it back with great certainty from the father's side, and I know in Judaism it's from the mother's side, but I had more curiosity about my father. Definitely Jewish on that side. No doubt about it. And if you want to go back to the last attempt to eradicate us, because, I mean, yes, October 7th has obviously sparked this discussion, but back in the 30s, with the greatest industrial genocide of our time, there would have been no questioning if I'm Jewish or not. Even if I don't have a personal God, I would have still been Juden. I still would have had a yellow star. There would have been no discrimination. People don't recognize that. I mean, if we're supposed to learn from history, you've taken no notes whatsoever. Your false avatars, clear as day for the last 3.5 months. You didn't learn anything. You didn't really listen to Jewish people at all. It's been clear and demonstratively clear in so many ways. We see the protests that are really just hate rallies. I often used Canadian examples for us to have perspective, because some people would say, why are you using London as an example? Well, because it is, whether we want to acknowledge it positively or not, the literal cradle of modern Western democracy and the values we carry. You can call them colonizers all you want. At the end of the day, this form of democracy that allows you to whine on these devices too is what was afforded to us by them. So over there, if we want to just qualify them as support rallies, the population of Saskatoon, Saskatchewan initially was showing up for the pro-Hamas rallies. The pro-Israel rallies was the equivalent of North Bay. Both nice towns, but nobody in Canada is going to dispute who is bigger, despite the fact that one of the most notorious abandoned mega mansions in the entire known world is in North Bay. That's a fun little note about Canadian history. I get distracted by those from time to time. And if you want to know my fixation about Saskatchewan, of course, it's hats off to Super Dave Osborne. Yes, Bob Einstein, the late, great Bob Einstein, with his genuine Saskatchewan sealskin bindings. And if you're familiar with Saskatchewan in any way, it's pretty landlocked. And I don't think the seals are making their way down from the Northwest Territories. Correct me if I'm wrong. One of the most subtle jokes of all time, and unless you're Canadian, you wouldn't have gotten it. But whether I'm Canadian, whether I'm an atheist or not, it wouldn't matter. I'm Jewish at the end of the day. And being here in Canada and observing the gross imbalance of who's saying death to Jews and death to Israel, and who's saying, hey, can you just leave us alone, please, so we can try to keep curing cancer? And, oh, yeah, developing the technology that allows you to use these phones to platform yourselves for your unapologetic hatred of the Jewish people these days. Well, history also provides us windows and examples of how the Jewish community has felt at certain levels, even in our Western democracies. And now I know I live in Marmor, but I did grow up primarily in Toronto, or at least a suburb across the street, Thornhill, but most of my adult life, the greater Toronto area. And regardless of who's been in government, because it's fair to say right now it's Olivia Chow, her political leanings were the NDP. her predecessor, John Tory, whatever way the wind blew for him to have any kind of political power, he'd either be conservative or liberal. And then even his predecessor, David Miller, nearly spent Toronto into bankruptcy, NDP, they allowed Al-Quds Day to parade through the streets of Toronto. And this is some dual responsibility here, by the way, because there's both municipal and provincial property in the conversation. Because for years, if I am to afford the benefit of the doubt for Al-Quds Day, which is their celebration of freedom of some kind, okay, if you're going to celebrate, but if you are to end your little parade at the foot of our provincial parliament, Queen's Park, burn Israeli flags, and oh yes, all the while you're parading around University Avenue, which is a fairly significant street in downtown Toronto, chanting death to Jews and death to Israel, I'm failing to understand the celebratory remarks behind that. Like if you're like, yay, this Muslim majority country is free from whatever tyranny and independence and all right, awesome. You chant that all day long, no problem. I'm failing to understand how all these mayors didn't recognize the literal and unapologetic hatred of Israel and the Jewish people. They're like, maybe we won't give them a permit. Every year's a maybe. And every year, regardless, and again, you got to remember that the Liberal government was in charge for quite some time at a provincial level. They did nothing about it. Kathleen Wynne was like, I don't know, they have the right to celebrate. Doug Ford, oh, we have a right to celebrate. Oh yeah, I forgot Rob Ford. Sorry, he also allowed Al-Quds Day. Rob Ford. The brothers Ford and their connections to the city of Toronto and the province of Ontario. Regardless of who's in power, regardless of their political leanings, though, the Jewish people haven't really been protected. It's constantly been lip service. That's throughout Canada. But for my personal experience, I have to focus on Toronto. It's where I lived. And it just so happens to be, as anyone knows, the center of the universe. The biggest city in Canada. We're not that big of a country either. And contrary to what you may think, there aren't a lot of Jewish people in this country. I think we rival the First Nations in terms of percentage. And I say that because there's this thing called the census. It allows you to legitimately look up the composition of every country. Newsflash, Canada is 72% white. Sorry if that puts a little pinprick in your notion of equal representation everywhere and how people can have equal rights to whatever you perceive as equal. I don't even know and understands what equal opportunity and equal outcomes are anymore, but the Jewish people by population, though, are not a significant political pawn, although I'd like to think that because we have chosen success over perpetual victimhood, even though that's what you perceive are saying, hey, remember the Holocaust? We've, as I keep learning about the history of our people, chosen careers that are of benefit or paths that are of benefit to others. We have skills that others don't have, just like anybody else's interests are. So you charge a fee for them. It's no different than a plumber. I'm not a plumber. I hire a plumber. They want, well, I happen to be a goalie coach, so I'm really an exception, but hey, if you choose what we have seen as a people as stereotypically accepted career paths that are of benefit, doctors, lawyers, accountants, heaven forbid we want to help you with all these things that you just really don't want to go to school for. Want to save your taxes? Hire an accountant. Okay, well, we're kind of interested in that stuff. All right, heaven forbid. Oh, the law and trying to look at life in a fair way? which I guess you can say could be part of this conversation. Yeah, we recognize unfairness. We try to have that balance in the law. After all, that's what the law is supposed to be, blind and fair. Medicine, I mean, it goes towards the ideals of tikkun olam. You hear a lot of people say that. That's to repair the world, regardless of who you are. I mean, really quickly, you can look this up yourself. It's easy to cite. It's easy to find, regardless of who it's been from Gaza or the West Bank. If they have heart problems, I mean, it's incredible. They have all these hospitals there. They somehow have to go to Israel, though, for valve replacement. Why do they have to? And this is pre-October 7th for all the loudmouths out there. This is when the hospitals were fully functional in all of Gaza. All of them. Why are they going to Israel for heart surgery? I don't know. Where am I going with this? Is that we are not a big population here in this country. And the rampant anti-Semitism is very concerning. I'm wanting to move to Israel, and I've already put in paperwork for Aliyah. It's the right of return. It just so happens to be a country that values democracy, regardless of what you think of it. The other sides don't. Actually, it's very funny. I wanted to bring this up earlier while I was discussing the Holocaust itself, because a lot of progressive people in the past who have pretended to be aware of what happened, yes, they acknowledge, yeah, it wasn't just the Jews, it was gypsies and homosexuals. What about the LGBTQT plus, or LGBTQTA plus? Is that what the anagram is now? That's the word. Am I using the right word? Anagram? Yeah, you were. There's no Jew that's going to deny that. Any non-Aryan was going to be in line. But if we're going to be accurate about history, and I can speak to this because I don't think, as the guy I've cited quite often, and he's in the description, Oren at Traveling Israel, Hitler often cited that we as Jews were a pestilence to be exterminated because we had no home, right? We were expelled from the land. That was a big deal. Being the diaspora is not new. You don't have a home. We're going to exterminate you. Oh, which, by the way, deflates Norm Finkelstein's arguments entirely, because there wouldn't have been a Holocaust if we had Israel. And then you would have had no career. I mean, Norm, I hate to break it to you. If the Allies weren't successful, you could have very well, and I'm not trying to say this in a derogatory way, you were numbered. You could have very well been in the oven in the next batch. You don't know. The Nazis were just like, okay, we're full. All right, ride's full. Oh, I don't know where they all, oh, we all know where they went. It's repugnant to ignore that very, very obvious point that, yes, if you were non-Aryan, that meant, okay, well, first the Juden, let's get rid of all of them. Then gypsies, homosexuals, I imagine people of color wouldn't have exactly fit the white and blonde-haired, blue-eyed description of the superior Aryan race. So, I mean, I guess you would have been thrown in too, but hey, he didn't quite get down far enough. He was only working with the then Grand Mufti of what you call Palestine because, oh yes, the Ottoman Turks and their reign over the land. However, again, I'm going to defer to more history lessons to Oren in the description. I'm trying to include things that he doesn't necessarily include because he has other priorities to discuss. But as it affects the diaspora and people who you assume are your exceptions to rules that prove your point that, look, there are Jews that are going to use the history of the Holocaust and say, no, the overwhelming amount of us do understand its totality. and won't use our family members' memory as this commercial identity to profit off of and cite yourself as the expert. Norm, I mean, really, it's easy history, man. You're not very familiar with Hitler if you can't figure out that one of the major reasons, again, is they're a pestilence without a home. Oh, okay. Well, what about people of Gaza? And notice I'm not going to use a Roman slur to describe them because I'm not going to do that. Sorry. I don't refer to myself as the K word. I'm not about to do that to anybody else with other slurs. They're Arabs. I don't deny that they have an ethnic background. They're Arabs who happen to, by and large, by the way, practice a religion called Islam, whose, by the way, most holy sites are in Saudi Arabia, Mecca, and Medina. Things Jews don't deny. You deny these things, regardless of what we demonstratively say about our history, or things that are just really easy to find out. You'll ask a Jew, cite it. Find a history book, like any one of them. People say, well, Google. Google is the new index card, baby. We used to have to go to the library and look these physical cards up. They look like cue cards. Don't ask me why I have one there. These are easy things to look up for yourself. I mean, that's how I marry a love of history and appreciation of history with my degree. I don't have to like these truths, but they are truths. And I happen to be Jewish. Regardless of my belief in a personal God. I was talking earlier about the values. I mean, geez, the values. I might not atone for my sins by not wearing deodorant, not brushing my teeth, spending my time in a place that may or may not have air conditioning with a lot of other people who have not done that. Like, no, I'm not doing that. I'm going to eat. I'm going to recognize that I've committed numerous sins of cynicism, that, yes, I am a very flawed human being. I have done wrong by people, and I know it, and I try to atone for it. I don't need to take to social media to say who they are. They'll probably say, yeah, actually, phoned me up and said this. What, am I going to have to cite that shit? That's my private life. But I know I've made mistakes. You learn that. You want another important lesson that even Oren, that I'm giving a lot of, again, citing to, because you cite sources, that's what you're taught to do. The story of Passover. I've talked about this, but I don't see a lot of people commenting on it. The story of Passover is one of the most significant holidays, right? Hanukkah? Not really. It's relevant right now, but I think Passover is one of the heavyweights. It's the story of Exodus. And every year in North America, we spend 2 nights discussing it. In Israel, it's typically 1. But after 10 plagues visited upon the Egyptians, 10, from benign to, we're going to kill your firstborn, and even after the 10th plague is visited upon the Egyptians, they're like, okay, we're still going to kill all the Jews. We make out with our matzah, because we're like, you've told us we can leave before, we're out. I'm giving you a real Barron's Notes version here. And as they followed us to the Red Sea, and you've seen the story countless times, if you grew up in the 80s like I did, and were literally doing this to adjust television channels, which there were like 5 of, and 3 of them had the 10 Commandments on, you saw Charlton Heston do this, part the Red Sea, and then eventually the Egyptians, trying to follow us to finish their job and say, we're killing all the Jews, drowned, because the sea collapsed once we got across the other side, and we did celebrate. I mean, geez, 10 plagues and you didn't get the hint? Killing your firstborn and you still want to kill us? Yeah, you're dead. And the minute we celebrate, God says to us, you celebrate as my children are dying. The Egyptians were drowning in the Red Sea, the people who sought to destroy every last one of us. And we had to learn then that despite this, we are not to celebrate the death of another human being. That is the story of morality in Passover, the story of Exodus. I don't necessarily believe in all of the mythical components that happen. However, the moral of that story, yeah. And we're living that right now. People are celebrating our deaths from October 7th. We didn't even retaliate. There are a lot of people, and yes, I say retaliate because that's what it is. They started a war, and I'll get to that notion in a second. It's maybe not even just a second. They just start this war on October 7th because we're Jewish, and they want to eradicate us all. Greatest loss of Jewish life in a single day since the Holocaust. And the next day, they're celebrating. You're celebrating in these major city centers, chanting the words of the Nazis. We're seeing this, and you say, no, you're not. It's a big reason why I want to leave Canada. My plans to leave are a little stunted right now. I've made no bones about it. I've said it very publicly. I want to make Aliyah and live in Israel. I don't necessarily feel safe in my own country. Well, the indifference in my small town is just that. There are people like, oh, you're going back. And not even just people here in Marmara, but people from Toronto, you're going back. I was born in Montreal. My parents made the Anglo exodus of the 70s because they're like, look, we can speak French, but this is becoming really problematic here. I ended up learning French, fairly bilingual still, but oui, je parle français. Avec un accent meilleur que presque tout Canada parce que j'ai étudié avec les professeurs qui viennent de Belgique et France aussi. Alors, je parle pas québécois français. That's all I'm going to do for now. But I'm going to have to learn some Hebrew. Because this country just time and again fails the Jewish community. And I am a member of that community. Which gets around to why I'm kind of doing this video. I've done a lot of things for the Jewish community. I've bragged about it on social media a lot. When I do, it's not really celebrated, even though I feel it's kind of worth celebrating. And I, again, don't really like drawing attention to myself personally, but hey, you ask for resumes, and then when there is one, you go, why are you talking about yourself? Well, nobody else really is, so there it is, plain as day. Am I Jewish? Yeah. I'm born of a Jewish mother, of a Jewish father. I was raised in a Reform household, very secular, but observing the high holidays with my family. Didn't have a lot of it in Toronto. It was mostly my mother's older cousin. Go to their house for Seder's. Observe Passover, Yom Kippur, Rosh Hashanah. My mother felt it was very important, actually, that we learn the tenets of Judaism. My Zadie, her father, came to Canada before World War II. My family, by and large, very lucky to have been out of that part of the world even before World War II. Yes, we lost some cousins, some more distant family, but the immediate family was mostly in Canada prior to World War II. So we are very fortunate in that regard. But long before it was fashionable to even be an atheist, I know for a fact that my Zadie was. But he also felt that as an adult, his children should at least be afforded the chance to learn about Judaism and make the choices for themselves. So his three daughters did that. And how they choose to practice. My mother, obviously one of them, said it's important that you get that opportunity as well. And I have. And I've more or less followed my Zadie's path, where there are values in Judaism that you apply. Because after all, for anybody who's any familiarity with religious texts, I don't have to be a scholar to tell you, it's the Old Testament. The Torah is the Old Testament. It's not saying that Judaism's perfect. It's not saying that our morals haven't evolved, but we've taken that time. As far as I understand, it's because of Talmud and rabbinical studies, more or less, taking over, that we've become a lot more secular over millennia, because part of the tenets of Judaism is even making it clear that we can question God. That's why there isn't a Messiah. That's one of the big differences between the more predominant monotheistic religions right now. I mean, look, 2.3 billion Catholics and Christians, that's the number one religion in the world, but not far behind is Islam at 1.8 billion. Fun tidbit, Indonesia has the highest Muslim population in the world. They're not Arab. This is a religion. But a lot of its roots and foundations are in the Old Testament. But our Talmud, the apparent 7-year continual debate amongst rabbinical studies, and that's what it is. Apparently, I don't participate in it. Again, I eat bacon. I eat bacon during Passover. I am a terrible Jew from a dietary standpoint. But at no point am I going to apologize for the fact that I'm Jewish or that I'm a Zionist. And living in this country, again, you don't feel protected by it. You don't feel protected by it anywhere. That's why a lot of us are making Aliyah. Plans to accelerate. You're going to go back? Well, it's the only place where we aren't going to see a Nazi rally in the middle of the street. So for starters, yeah, although there are those pesky car ramming, stabbings, and shootings in our own borders. When people cross the border with less than favorable intent. Keeping in mind, by the way, quick footnote, there are 2 million Arab Israelis with full rights. There's your little apartheid nonsense. Hearing all that. By the way, the Queers Against Israeli Apartheid, birthplace of that, University of Toronto. Canada on the forefront of anti-Semitism, paying lip service to it, and being origin points of one of the most questionable anti-Israel movements out there. You say to them, and by the way, I wanted to footnote, that's the very same community that will go, don't you know Hitler had it out for the LGBTQT++ or LGBTQTA++ community? He gassed them with you too? Yeah. What's your point? It was horrible. The people in Gaza would do the same to you. The 70th percentile of them supported what happened on October the 7th. They're not all innocent. The people that you quote with numbers from Hamas, by the way, which is hilarious. Believe Hamas wholeheartedly, but Israel, we're not going to believe them. All these civilians, nah, when you fight in polos and Crocs, but you hand over civilians in your fatigues, that makes you a coward. When you fire from schools, hospitals, you're a coward. You're not a soldier. As I often joke, you want to talk about the comparisons. I mean, geez, I have fun with this ideal. The Nazis at least had enough pride to wear their Hugo Boss uniforms out in the mud. These people, they parade around nobly. Here are your hostages, or at least a handful of them, and we're going to wear our fatigues doing this. But when we're actually fighting, we're going to ditch them for Crocs and polos. Oh, look at all the civilians. Yeah, where are all the fatigues? Any of them? We have to figure out people that are firing at us first, which is, again, they fire first and then say, look at us, we're the victim. I mean, all of this is microcosms and points that others have brought up routinely. But there are other issues laying underneath those still that I don't think get explored enough. I mean, how many more points do we as people have to make as an actual minority for you to understand how we're feeling? I'm an atheist, but I'm still Jewish. If I was to be in any kind of Arab or Muslim majority country, that's a double whammy, right? You're a Jew and an atheist? Yeah, well, the infidel Jew double whammy. We don't get those very often. I mean, these are the religious ideals. If you really just look beyond the surface of them, really, I can't sit there and understand how you sit there when they have every country, and I mean that. That relates back to Norm and his idea of all the Palestinians. Well, what about them? First of all, they're Arabs. Second of all, there's no Arab country taking them. There's no outrage over the fact that there's a permanent wall that you can't even pass through at all with Egypt into the Sinai Peninsula, which, by the way, Israel handed over for peace. The Sinai Peninsula also threw out our religious text. But we gave it to Egypt for peace and have had it. Sinai's bigger than Israel. And we've had one of the longest peaceful, or at least at the very worst, détentes with Egypt for decades now. Even Jordan learned their lesson in 1967. And Jordan, you want to talk about occupying, they were the governing body over all of Jerusalem, which again, if you rewind a little bit, that's the holiest site in all of Judaism. Jerusalem. We weren't even allowed to pray there. You're busy talking about checks and border checks. It's like, you want to go pray? Good luck, Jew. What? Actually, I think we were allowed to, but we had to go through checkpoints. I could be mistaken, which I think I've gone on quite a bit. I'm out of practice with this kind of stuff, but if you do want to leave a comment, because I know you're not here live, but at some point, if you do, again, stay on point, which is what Oren asks you to do. I would ask you to do the same regardless of my familiarity with him, though. These are some irrefutables here. You bring up a lot of points that are really easy to refute. Norm, there's 22 literal neighboring Muslim majority countries. A good handful of them are also Arab majority. You have to distinguish between the two. Sorry, you caught me flubbing. Just so happens that a lot of Arabs happen to practice Islam. Now I'm repeating myself, redundancy. I need an editor. I also need more practice. But the point I'm trying to make is everybody who cries for this community, where's your outrage at their Arab Muslim neighbors that aren't taking them at all? Where the Kingdom of Jordan openly stated within a week, we're not taking any of them. Not one. If you look up their history, by the way, in Jordan, there's a reason. There are, quote unquote, as you like to call them, Palestinians living in refugee camps in Jordan proper, amongst other Arab Muslim nations that don't have the time of day for, as you call them again, Palestinians. I just call them Gazans at this point because that's where they live. They're Arabs. They're Arabs that live in the West Bank. They just like the rebrand they got in 1964. Because again, I'm not going to attribute anything to a Roman slur that was even given to us when we were in the land at that time as well, 2nd century. The Roman colonizers. Everybody cries about colonialism. What about the Roman Empire that conquered just about all of the Middle East and renamed the land Syria Philistina? La, 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 la. Like, it's easy stuff. You want to talk about low-lying fruit? It's really easy. So yes, for anybody who's crying for the citizens of Gaza, who, by the way, are now being welcomed into Canada. Remember, over 70% of the citizens in Gaza and the West Bank supported what happened on October 7th. And their respective governments would support it. Hamas will act on it right now, though. They've openly stated that, too. We'll do it again. Given the opportunity, we'd do it tomorrow. More comparisons? I mean, geez, it's insane. Yes, Israel is telling people, we're going to bomb the north, you go to the south. Oh, okay. Oh, but we got to live in a tent. That's better than dead. And where I was going to go with everybody who talks about genocide and the chutzpah of South Africa, who leads all African countries in crime. It's incredible to think of every country in Africa that is rife with poverty and crime. South Africa sits at number one. Amazing. Genocide. I mean, at the very onset, the word genocide was coined through the Holocaust. And first of all, again, I'm very suspicious of the tens of thousands that I'm going to venture to say are, oh, yeah, part of the civilian army of Hamas. Hey, where are your civilian fatigues? Oh, you mean my golf shirt? Oh, yeah, that. What shoes do you have at home? Just don't wear the boots and fatigues, all right? Confuse the public. Right? Then blame Israel. Okay, good. Insane. Losing my train of thought, unfortunately, because it's hard not to get caught up emotionally about this, really. You live in Canada and you see these hate rallies, and you see how little is done to protect the Jewish community and Jews around the world. Bringing them to Canada, without question, really. These are refugees. By the way, another fun fact about the Palestinians, as you like to call them, they're the only quote unquote refugees that are born into refugee status. They don't even need to be born in Gaza or the West Bank to be considered a refugee. So now their children are going to be refugees in Canada permanently. They can claim refugee status at any time, even if they were to come here and have a baby in Canada. They'd be born a refugee. How insane is that? Go ahead and try and correct me on that one. That's not something that gets brought up as often on either side of the pond, but that's a fun one. Again, the other fun one is no other Arab nation taking them, because these are Arabs who happen to practice Islam by and large. Again, for those catching up, if you guess that Indonesia has the largest Muslim population in the world, well, you win a prize. It's not Iran, it's not Iraq, it's not even Saudi Arabia. No, it's Indonesia. Just so happens that there's a lot of Jewish people in Israel because it's the only Jewish majority country in the world. If we had it, we wouldn't have been exterminated in Germany. We wouldn't have been called a pestilence by the Aryan in chief. Norm Finkelstein wouldn't have any career whatsoever. Neither would guys like Gabor Mate. I think he's Canada's equivalent. He's the useful idiot. And I'm not saying that in a derogatory sense. That's literally what Hitler and the Nazis would call Jews who would turn in their fellow Jews, thinking they'd be spared. There was no Jew spared. Once you turned the last Jew in the ghetto, they said you can get in the cattle car too. What? I thought I was helping. And you believed us? When we said all the Juden, we meant all the Juden. That means you. That also means someone like me. Hitler wasn't going to stop with just the European Jewry. It's very clearly stated in the charter of Hamas and many of its other brethren that it is to eliminate the Jews of the world, not just Israel. And you ignore that too. Right? It's not even just Hamas in Gaza. There's the Islamic Jihad. They're the minority terrorist group in Gaza. They're remnants of the Muslim Brotherhood. What do they all have in common? Well, they know the song From the River to the Sea. They know the adage that drives a lot of that, being that there's a tree and a stone that's telling people that there's Jews hiding behind it, so kill them. 1.8 billion people read that, and for whatever reason you ignore it. I mean, if you even want to go pure math on that statistic and you say 1% of that population are extremists, that's 18 million extremists. That's more than all the Jews of the world. Again, we're not even a small province in China. We're a micro province. We're a condo complex. I mean, you want to know what a billion is for context? An idiot like me, because again, if you go into any kind of broadcasting career, unless you're having to time out in radio, fun one for you there, math isn't what you pursued. But 1%, 18 million extremists, 1,000 million is a billion. 1,000 million is a billion. So what's even the highest estimate of Jews in the world is 16 million. That's the highest estimate. 18 million. We're outgunned on that stat alone. 1.8 billion people observe a religion that wholeheartedly calls to kill Jews, unapologetically. That's ingrained. In Gaza, there was Gaza Mickey, and still to this day, pretty much the only copyright infringement lawsuit that Disney hasn't filed is on Gaza Mickey. Teaching kindergartners to kill Jews, to literally have school plays that reenact what happened on October 7th. Wait a minute. Oh no, they were doing that decades ago. We'll call it practice for October 7th. Again, this is all history that ties together. I mean, people draw the Nazi comparisons, but I mean, if anything, really, if I haven't spelled it out for you to understand, I'm trying to avoid even sensational language. I mean, again, the comparisons. The people who were quick to, again, point out that they killed the LGBTQIA++ community in Nazi Germany. Okay. You're throwing the term genocide, which I was getting to. Yes, South Africa throws that term around, and there's been steady population growth in Gaza since 2005. And while everybody openly acknowledges the proportionality argument that Israel's military might is far superior, and you acknowledge that we have this incredible air force, you do understand that if Israel wants to rebrand the Blitzkrieg, which is indiscriminate carpet bombing, this war would have been over on October 8th. People say that, and yet hypocritically go genocide. No. If Israel literally wanted to commit genocide without apology or second thought to human life, this war would have been over in a morning or afternoon. Like if it was Friday, it would have been, we got to get this done before sundown. Go. You openly acknowledge it and then ignore it for the sake of throwing out that libel. I brought it up earlier. Oh no, they're living in displaced areas. Yes, because Israel told them to leave. Go there so when we're bombing here, you're not going to get killed. I mean, there's 2 million people that live in Gaza. You called it an open-air prison, which is ridiculous unto itself. If you look at this state essentially prior to October the 7th, they have beachfront community. They have luxury hotels. They aren't quite Dubai, but hey, they were doing okay in some senses. They could have been better if their leaders weren't embezzling the foreign aid and, oh yeah, building terror tunnels that would be the envy of the TTC and their construction capabilities and timelines. But still, I digress. You want your cake and you eat it too? I mean, come on. Genocide. How? Well, I mean, you're bombing them with your jets. Yes. First with leaflets, second with duds, and then with live ammunition. The Germans did not do that to the people of England. The Blitzkrieg was indiscriminate carpet bombing. There was no warning other than maybe the intelligence of, what's that? They're going to be bombing London? You want to draw the comparisons, it's really easy. And it's easy historical fact to look up if you paid any attention. You don't even need to edit this history. Like, it's simple. Go look up the Blitzkrieg. You can do it while listening to the Ramones even. That'll come up in your search. And it's not nearly as fun. It's easy. Why is this hard? It shouldn't have to be. By every measure, Jews are minorities. No matter how you observe your personal God, you're going to get slaughtered no matter what. Right? Again, Hitler made no distinctions. Atheist Jew, observant Jew, you were still the Juden. Any Islamist extremist, which again will give you your lowest estimate, 18 million of them, won't hesitate to kill a Jew. Period. Here's a Jew. Boom. Don't have a firearm? Whatever weapon they have. I'm not speaking out of turn. That's your estimate. It's only 1%. 1% of 1.8 billion still dwarfs the entire Jewish community. The entire population. And we squabble amongst ourselves. We're at a point where we do that too. Well, I'm tired of sitting behind on the sidelines, the platforms that I had before, not useful. The only one I have left here being YouTube. And the first time I'd really give a good go, no, I'm not expecting people to be watching live at this time in the Eastern time zone. I'm not expecting a lot of people to really watch this at all, but it's going to be out there because it has to be out there. These are very relevant and easy historical markers and points that get lost in conversations very, very quickly. And they shouldn't be, because people make these accusations without merit, and it's easy to debunk them. The term Occam's razor, I mean, a generation of people should know that from watching The Simpsons. The most obvious outcome, the Bart, the kill all the Jews means kill all the Jews. When we say never again and never forget, and you had that on your social media avatars for years around the anniversary of the Holocaust, you pretended to care and learn the lessons of it, and then, oh, here's an example of them trying to kill us all again. You go, not really. Huh? That's why our community is caught off guard with some of you, because even the greatest of virtue signalers were doing the never again and never forget thing, but clearly don't follow through on that one. You're more than willing to follow through on the other ones. Again, we've covered this now as a community. We see you. Right? So I'm not going to apologize for certain verbiage I'm using, but I've avoided swearing. I mean, I really do want kids to be able to see this. I think I dropped the S word once by accident, so I apologize. If you caught it and, oh no, YouTube's algorithm says, you're age restricted now. Oh no, I guess people who are 18 or over are going to have to watch and say, kids, gather around. But there's nothing historically inaccurate about what I've said. There's no hate behind what I've said. These are things that are just plain and easy to research and find. You find me any Jewish person with a large platform that's going to deny Saudi Arabia's right to exist. That is the ethnic homeland of the Arabic people. Right? That is a race. If you want to recognize our Semite brothers and sisters, yes, they recognize Saudi Arabia as their ethnic homeland. They also happen to recognize Mecca and Medina as the most significant religious sites in all of Islam. There's no Jew that denies that either. There's no Jew that says, hey, no pilgrimage for you. There's like 1 billion people that make a pilgrimage every year to Saudi Arabia to go to Mecca and pray. Mecca's full. I guess we'll go to Medina. And it's not a hop, skip, and a jump over to what they consider their third holiest site, the Dome of the Rock, the Al-Aqsa Mosque, on top of our temple. Built on top of our temple, literally. And that's our second temple even. So, these are just objective truths. I know we struggle with that on a grand scheme, but in the context of this conversation, what do Jews deny? None of this. Right? From a moral standpoint, we all learn about the story of Exodus if you pay any attention whatsoever. And the simple one, there's the 4 questions. It's just a core tenet of the story of Exodus and Passover is the 4 questions itself. It's not a directive, it's a question. And you ask and you try and fulfill those questions and answer those questions every year. Abraham, my again, tertiary understanding of my religion at its foundations, questioned at the 0 hour. God said, okay, it was a test. You don't have to kill your son. Abraham's like, I'm glad I put that one off. If Abraham didn't question God's motives whatsoever, there's no son. It's just, oh, you want me to kill him? Huh? All right. You got any directions? Any preferences? Those weren't the questions. It was, wait, what? Our whole religion is arguing and questions, not assertions. Although there are people who say, well, you assert that you're the chosen people. I don't even like that moniker. I really don't like that branding. It does come across as arrogant. I'll give you that. I've said that often. But the same token, if the land of Allah is all in Saudi Arabia and Muhammad, the prophet, blessed be he, it's Mecca and Medina, okay. Any objections, Jewish community? Anyone? Looking at the back for the real Orthodox. You there? I don't see any hands. And then again, with the benefit of history, and you see migration patterns and the spread of Islam itself, the two kind of go hand in hand. The conquests, I apologize again. If I ever mispronounce something, I try to catch myself very quickly. My degree would frown upon me. I'm staring at it right now, which again, I'll cite is from Ryerson Polytechnic University, now known as Metropolitan University of Toronto, with the prestigious 4-year degree in radio and television arts from the year 2000. Bombarded with media, sift through the language, the history. There's really easy history to look at. You want to look at conquerors and famous conquerors. I mean, it's not just Napoleon. It's not just Alexander. It's not just Genghis. The Persian Empire, the Ottoman Empire, the expansion of Arabia and Islam. Why do you think there are so many practicing Muslims in Indonesia? Right? These aren't conquests that are unknown to history. All it is an easy Google search for anyone. Or you Google. Okay, go to the library then. All the index cards are in a computer now anyway. That's my fun joke. I've said it before, but if you're watching now or you're catching on, I don't know. I'm blabbing on into the ether right now because this is my first video going live. And I think there are sentient points that do get missed in this coverage. I mean, you can say I haven't spoken much about Israel. I don't find that Israel is the one initiating any war crimes here specifically because Israel isn't using human shields. That's another war crime that you always overlook. Hamas fighting in civilian clothing and literally hiding in civilian buildings, firing rockets, and using human shields. Like easy stuff, and you apologize for it. I'm not going to apologize for the fact that we drop leaflets, make phone calls, and tell you to evacuate, and then you go, "Oh, people died. People are living in camps. People." These are all easy answers that you overlook because we're Jews. What do we do? What did we do? It doesn't matter even how we observe. We're still Jews. I'll always be Jewish. My lack of belief in a personal God does not exempt me from being a Jew. It doesn't exempt me from acknowledging the faults of an Israeli government. And by the way, I'm only a few months old in learning about what a lot of people are talking about as the hot button issue, at least in Israel politically. Because if I am to say make Aliyah, which I've put in my paperwork, the timing's just got to be right. I don't need to discuss a lot more than that, but people will like the political unrest. Well, if I can address that, excuse me, no cough buttons here. Canada, to give you an idea, as a country, is fairly young. Right? We just finished celebrating a few years ago our 150, so we're not even kicking close to 200 yet. And I know that's the colonial history that people will have a shit fit over. Pardon my S word again there. I caught myself. I'm sorry. Sorry to the young audience out there. I guess that qualifies in a PG movie these days, though. Has for quite some time. Sorry, YouTube, about algorithm. Sorry. Where was it going? Jeez, get lost in catching myself swearing. Jeez. Yes, Canada's young history, and then our Charter of Rights. There we go. Because Confederation, again, you look back to 1867. Am I right there? 1867. Newfoundland joined a little late. They were the last. Newfoundland, Labrador, if I remember correctly, the last to join Confederation. It's been a little while since I graduated high school and got my Canadian history down, so sometimes, hey, again, I always welcome comments if people catch me making a mistake. But our Charter of Rights and Freedoms, however, our governing document for our rights and freedoms, was only ratified in 1981, got royal assent. Did we have a constitution? Did we have a basic foundation of law? Absolutely. But the default Charter of Rights and Freedoms that our laws are enforced for is still fairly young. Israel lacks one. That's one of the big issues facing Israel. So you want to talk about that? Sure, go ahead. And I always try and contextualize this. You see, because precedent in Western democracies matter. Laws matter. That's what they're trying to do in Israel. Interestingly enough, one of Israel's Supreme Court judges is an Arab Muslim. So much for the apartheid again. And the debate is, how much power should the judiciary have over the government and the laws they're trying to pass? Now, you're going to sit there and say it's Netanyahu, but it also would then be government, right or left. Right? That's what precedent and balance is all about. It's supposed to set the level for everyone. That's why it can be so problematic when you see such imbalance. So if the quest for balance, though, has to come through a document, and people say, well, I mean, it's taking forever. Again, Canada's didn't get royal assent until 1981. That was incredible to me. I forgot how young our guiding legal document is. And we had the benefit of history, even of looking at America and going, okay, what's our big little brother doing with that First Amendment there? Because people in Canada, by the way, and this is relevant, have this idea that we have freedom of speech. We don't. Now, we trusted the government in using the very first clause for extreme cases like what's going on now, right? To limit your speech essentially when it causes undue harm and promotes undue harm. Now, again, we've struggled with words, but that guiding principle is through utilitarianism and John Stuart Mill, right? People say that, oh, it's like anarchy. It's no. Speech can be restricted if your happiness is contingent on other people's undue harm. Well, then that speech not going to fly. That essentially is what our first clause is here. And that's why for the Jewish community it is very problematic, because they aren't chanting, like I said, Al-Quds Day for years paraded through the streets of Toronto, death to Jews and death to Israel. Now look, if by definition Al-Quds Day is to celebrate your independence, I fail to understand the independence being contingent on you shouting to the death of others. That's hate speech. And as we've seen, October 7th, they'll follow through. Right? If we didn't have the laws that are being very loosely enforced right now, at least when it comes, again, to the safety of the Jewish community, there is still the mechanism of law that protects us enough. But it takes a lot of Jewish advocacy and Jewish lawyers to say, excuse me, do our rights matter? Like, do you see what they're doing? Like, what does this have to do with their supposed free Palestine nonsense by going to a bridge in Toronto where there's a Jewish community? What does that have to do with it? When political commenters who have far greater reach than me are saying, okay, so on October 8th, you show up to the Israeli consulate and start protesting. Israel didn't even do anything yet. That was happening, again, in London. I like to use London, England a lot, because if they're the epicenter of democracy in World War II, our last great conflict on a world scale, and we're the bastions of democracy that everyone rallied around, you have to look at them with great importance. Their historical importance to the Western world we have today, inextricably linked. Whether you like it or not, whether you think they're the big bad white slavery colonialist sons of in the history of humanity, they aren't. No one's exempt from it, but they aren't. Again, it's the reason we have these rights. It is the reason you think you can freely just go to Avenue Road and the 401 and chant homicidal tunes directed at Jews. From the river to the sea, from the Jordanian River to the Mediterranean will be free of Jews? No! These are, again, non-negotiables. I haven't even talked about where you completely ignore decades of the word no. Right? All the drama right now in the United States about Donald Trump. I'm going to say this right now. I am not a fan of Orange Man. Okay? I'm not. I don't like him. But he suffers from, here's another one for you, broken clock syndrome. Now, I know we have these digital clocks that roll in perpetuity. But back in the day with those grandfather clocks that your grandparents still have, if a clock broke, the arm is still pointed at a time. So you could walk past that twice a day and go, oh, the time is right, actually. It is. Well, under his administration, the Abraham Accords became a very real thing. And I want to highlight those because they are important, because he's like, look, we've offered a separate state many times. Most notably, even under Bill Clinton's administration, when Yasser Arafat stood there and basically right in front of Yitzhak Rabin was like, no. Was it Yitzhak? Yitzhak was assassinated over it, so. By someone referred to just the murderer, because he was one of those very rare Orthodox Jews who don't believe in Zionism. The worst of the useful idiots. Said no. Bill Clinton, regardless of what you're going to say right now about him, when he was in office, it was his greatest foreign policy regret. He felt he had an agreement for peace, and Yasser Arafat walked away at the 0 hour, much to the bewilderment of Israel. You were going to get East Jerusalem as a capital. They wanted all of Jerusalem. And we're like, nope. And it also boiled down to, so what about Israel? Oh, we want all of it. So that's not really two states. So negotiation over. Israel conceded to 96% of Yasser Arafat's demands. The ones we objected to were no Jews and no Israel. It's like, no. And that's where these Abraham Accords become very significant, because you see Morocco, which is a Muslim majority country, Bahrain, and the United Arab Emirates all have peace agreements. Now, I'm leaving a fourth one out. I'll get right to them. But, I mean, obviously, the UAE being major, because they're, on a worldwide scale, pretty rich. And for the longest time, there were no Jews. There was no synagogue. And within a year of these normalized peace negotiations, and now a signed agreement, there's even a synagogue in Dubai. And the fourth country to have normalized relations under these Abraham Accords is the Sudan. And the Sudan is where it was notorious that Abdul al-Nasser said, no peace, no recognition, no negotiation. Yeah, in the Sudan, where the Arab majority countries and Muslim majority countries all said we would not negotiate or even recognize Israel's right to exist. And now the origin of that, Sudan, says, no, we're going to have normalized and peaceful relations with Israel. Broken clock is right twice a day. Places that literally said never. If you learn anything from James Bond, never say never, although I've used those absolutes before. And there are absolutes in this. There just are. Unfortunately, in war, there are civilian casualties. It's a horrible consequence of war. Israel did not want this war. That is very clear. You can call them colonizers and occupiers all you want. There's not a single Jew in Gaza. And to go into the West Bank, it just depends on what part of it, because there are checkpoints where Jews are not allowed. And if you accidentally go through them, you could very well find yourself a hostage. The West Bank isn't exactly our friend either. Interestingly enough, it's Judea and Samaria, and Judea has this eerie resemblance to Judaism. Again, more for Oren, who is in the description. One of the great ambassadors for the state of Israel. He is not a Netanyahu supporter whatsoever. He is just historically accurate in the general feelings of Israelis. The vast majority are not happy right now about what's going on. It was just, can you just leave us alone, and we'll continue developing all the technology in the world that you use so freely, but say you want to boycott us for. All of this. Leave us be. We just want to contribute. Can we join your golf club? You weren't allowed to, actually. That's why there are a lot of Jewish-only country clubs. Very famously, there are pictures throughout the United States. Goyim only. That's non-Jew. Yeah, we were excluded from beaches. There are historical photos where there were water fountains for colored, Jew, and dog. We're Caucasian, though, right? This is all just so easy. Easy to find. I know I've been a little scattered. I apologize for that. I get on some tangents here and there sometimes. I remember where I'm at and I rein it in. If you've been lost in all of this at some point, I apologize. Again, I know I'm live. Not expecting a lot of live viewers. Maybe people will catch on at some point. Maybe a handful, maybe some shares, maybe even some subscribes. I don't know. That's what you're supposed to do, right? Hit subscribe. I might do this again, infrequent, I don't know. But I'm going to give credit where credit's due. I'm going to cite it when I can cite it directly. Again, a lot of the relevant points of view from Israel come from a gentleman by the name of Oren, Traveling Israel. Description has the links. I just like to think that I've got a degree that I'm staring at that I haven't put to a lot of good use for the years, and a lot of that rests on me. Trust me, I know where I'm accountable for it. And I know there's a tool right here that enables me to avoid using these fat thumbs and back-end editing processes that are still a flippin' nightmare for someone like me. Yes, I can write. Yes, I can read. But I prefer this medium. And I felt as though after a difficult week that it was time to speak, because honestly, if I have access like everyone else, I may as well use the tool. Do I have a fancy setup? No. But my phone's microphone works. The cameras are all pretty good. I don't have that circular light. I've got some other LEDs around the house that have given me, I don't know, how's the white balancing? Oh no. Sorry, that's a technical term, kids. Yeah, exposure's doing okay. But what's not okay is how it feels to be Jewish in Canada or in other places where we find ourselves seeing these rallies where there's hate, where we see opinions being shared that are really completely unfounded, accusations that have no foundation in what used to be held as objective truth and fact, words that the Oxford Dictionary used to defend, Merriam-Webster or whomever published Rogers separately as a thesaurus. And just, I fail to understand even how these really easy, objective, historical truths and facts aren't brought up with more regularity. It's easy to confront people like Norm Finkelstein. I bring him up a lot because it's important, because people cite him. Well, he'll wipe the floor with you. How? How? His family was a matter of time. If the Allies didn't win, we don't have a Norm Finkelstein. And I'm not saying that I wanted that to follow through. I didn't want the Holocaust at all. What human being, well, what decent, moral human being would have looked at that? And you question it because you saw it happen. It did happen. And we're saying never again. And you have guys like even Canada's Gabor Mate, I believe I'm pronouncing correctly. But for every Gabor, there is at least, I'm trying to pronounce his name right, Saad. Gilad Saad, I believe, is pronouncing it right. I could look it up on the phone, but I'm using it right now. But for everybody who finds their useful idiot, and that's what Hitler would call Jews who would be the ones saying, yes, they're hiding here, or no, round them up. There's just really easy facts to deflate the argument. We're treating the Palestinians like we were? No. They have homelands to go home to. Jordan doesn't want them. Jordan is actively denying them a right of return, as are Syria and Lebanon and Libya, other countries where these people are actually from 2 generations ago. Displaced? Yeah, by their own people. And now there's none of them being welcomed anywhere. Canada's taking them in, and other Western nations are. We're seeing the direction that others have gone in the past and where it's brought them to, which is a greater discussion, I suppose. But nobody's taking them for a reason. And these are Arabs. They happen to practice Islam, by and large. And there's undeniable quotes in their religious texts. There's undeniable footage of Gaza Mickey and several United Nations run schools that openly teach Jew hatred and have kindergartners performing plays of abducting Jews. killing Jews. Interestingly enough, they have the children wearing the Hamas military fatigues, but when they do the actual fighting, which you so conveniently ignore, they tend to wear golf shirts and Crocs. Blend right in. I mean, camouflage, don't get better than that, does it? Evacuate the north. Oh my God, they bombed the north. Yeah, and we told them to leave. Well, there were casualties, and there would have been more if we didn't tell them to go south. The Germans did not afford anybody this when they performed the Blitzkrieg. There were no warnings. It was carpet bomb. Okay. Israel has disproportionate responses. If you really want to see disproportionate and Israel pull a Blitzkrieg, I mean, we could. We choose not to. What, you'd nuke? No, that's not a Blitzkrieg. That's mobilizing our Air Force without leaflets or the burden of dud bombs. Just, no, live ammo and just go. So you acknowledge on one hand we have that superiority, but we really don't flex it. You say we commit genocide. Prove it. Well, South Africa is. No, South Africa is distracting the world from their own problems. When you're number one in crime in all of Africa and you're essentially committing acts of segregation again, even though you aren't throwing around apartheid anymore, you got to distract the world from your own problems and throw around accusations that have no real merit. Population growth since 2005. Oh, they're committing it now. Not really. Because again, if you're going to sit there and say, hey, Israel's Air Force, I mean, they could do what they want. Yeah, and clearly they're not. Everybody falls silent on these points. They drop leaflets. Yeah, so what? Telling them to leave. Did the paragliders on October 7th do that before they started committing those atrocities against music goers? Did they say, can you please interrupt this concert and let everybody run as fast as they possibly can before we catch up and do what we're about to do? And I can't even bring myself to say it. I know the algorithm will censor it, and I haven't even really brought it up, but I was about to commit a grammatical sin. Brought in it. Give me a break. What's wrong with me? Ryerson's going to take its degree back. So here we are. I've had many months to truly digest it, and I've said it on other platforms, but again, they're not social anymore. They really aren't. And I know I'm opening up the opportunity for someone to make comments about my Judaism and, oh, you're complicit with genocide. Well, no, because it just doesn't meet the term. I'm an atheist Jew. At the end of the day, they'll come for me. Really. And if you're not following the prophet, they'll come for you. You're an infidel. They're laughing at you. If you're marching with them and you're an infidel or you're part of the LGBTQTA++ community, they are laughing at you in Arabic, by and large. Not so sure in Indonesia, but definitely in these Arab majority and Muslim majority countries. They're laughing at you in your support because you are an infidel, much like Hitler saying, I'm starting with the Juden, but I've already gotten the gypsies. I've gotten a good handful of, at the time, we'll just refer it in the modern parlance, LGBTQTA++. I don't think Hitler would have afforded them that. Just putting that out there. Yeah, we openly acknowledge it wasn't just Jews. It was all non-Aryans. So once he was finished with the priority, the Juden, and the other easy pickings, he would have come for anybody who wasn't Caucasian with blue eyes, even though he didn't seem to fit that description. History evades you. You draw false equivalents. You again have people like Norm Finkelstein who are so easy to define. I don't even understand how that guy has a career. It's not the same. There's literally no similarity. There are dozens of countries to go to. for any Arab, but for whatever reason, other Arab countries aren't taking in these Arabs. And that's what they are. There's no denying it. You bring up a new moniker that is based on a Roman slur, I'm not going to give you that. No, I'm not. You cannot anoint yourself a slur and then say it's not. No. Because if that's the case, there's a laundry list of slurs that a bunch of people are really chomping at the bit to use. So I'm not about to use that one. These are Arabs. These are Arabs that live in Gaza. That's their nationality or statehood. There are those that live in the West Bank. That's their supposed statehood, governed by Fatah, not Israel. Which again, I mean, you throw the word occupation. By who? You supply water. You supply electricity. Yeah, because they've squandered their billions and they buy it from us. If you default on your hydro bill, Hydro One in Canada can just go, not just in Ontario. Yeah, it's just Ontario. Hydro One, they can just come to my house right now. You didn't pay the bill. Fortunately, I'm on a well, so I get my own water. I mean, priorities, again, hashtag priorities. Build tunnels or infrastructure. I would personally choose infrastructure and say, oh, you gave us this state? You left the greenhouses? Chumps. We get to make our own food now? Yeah. That's actually the real reason why we left it. So you could, have food. It's amazing what you can look back on very easily and see what Israel left behind in 2005. Why was it destroyed? Oh, yeah, because Jews built it. Not a Jew in Gaza, not a Jew in the West Bank. 2 million Arabs living in Israel, many of whom are Muslim and get to practice their faith openly. Represented in the government, on the judiciary, all these things. Again, I'm getting a little long about that, and I've tried to cite Oren as much as possible from the Israeli perspective because his is, quite frankly, one of the most objective and unique out there. But there are just other historical facts and other issues at play that are affecting the diaspora. I don't want to live in Canada anymore. I don't feel safe here as a country. I don't feel like the Jewish community is truly being protected by any level of government, be it municipal, provincial, or federal. The only federal government that actually spoke openly in support of Israel was Stephen Harper's, Pierre Poilievre, and I am pronouncing it properly, making the same assertions. And that's actually relieving to see in today's political climate. My prime minister currently is awaiting the international mockery and their decision before they go, yeah, no, it's genocide for sure then. International court says so. Hey, look, these courts in the UN, it's incredible how a human rights council could be headed by Iran. It's incredible that a case can be heard when lobbied by a country whose crime rate is astronomically high, so much so that it holds the distinction as being number one on the continent of Africa. And let's face it, there are many countries in Africa who aren't exactly the safest, but South Africa, like when you're number one, whoa. That's irrefutable evidence, by the way. That's your own crime data. But that's what it's like being a Jew anywhere, no matter how observant you are. Here I am again, atheist Jew. I will always be a Jew. I live in Canada. I aspire to make Aliyah. Because it just doesn't feel right here anymore. So, I don't know what more to say, really. I'm on almost 2 hours. Again, I apologize if I haven't done my degree right, but I don't think I've said my prime minister's favorite word, once. I let an S bomb slip a couple times. I'm sorry, kids. Parents, if you're watching this for any reason and your kid caught an S word, I'm sorry. Don't let them watch 80s movies. Bad idea. Don't do that. But if you have chosen to invest your time in this, thank you. If there's something you want to correct from a factual standpoint, I'll welcome that. But if you're going to make it personal, I'm going to do my best not to treat it like social media, because that's really hard. Because generally those are attacks on your character and your reputation. And that's something that most individuals hold very dear. And in a world of personal truths, well, if somebody's trying to attack your actual objective personal truth, you're going to fight tooth and nail to preserve it. So it's really hard to ignore those kinds of comments. I get that. And I get how there is a risk of putting myself out there like this right now. But I do have a voice. I've tried to use other platforms that I'm no longer part of to articulate it. I don't know if I'll come back here to do it again anytime soon, because I know how easy it is to get caught up in this environment too. But these are very sentient and important points that don't get brought up a lot. Often they're conflated with real sensational language. I've tried to, again, ignore that too. I've tried to use empirical data, right? Not my personal feelings. Things like the census in Canada, really, or any country that accumulates information legally, right? The reason you know Canada's demographics, just for fun, by the way, because some of you are unfamiliar with how we get these numbers. The census, you get that in the mail, you have to fill it out by law. It's one of those things that it's like, oh yeah, I guess. Doesn't hurt to know. You have to fill it out. Elections officials will come to your home with law enforcement if you don't. Yeah, you can look that up. How do you know? Lonnie, how do you know? Well, it's because the census says so. It's pretty ironclad there. So I know how many Jews there are in Canada. And in most countries that keep these kinds of records, you know how many Jews there are. So that's how we know and quantify how many there are of us. We don't hide it. However you practice it, we still know we are. So while yes, about half of our population is in Israel, a fairly secular Jewish state, yes, it identifies as Jewish governance and identity, but overall, it's been a secular existence. There are even stores open on Friday and Saturday. And don't count on Walter Sobchak to go shopping. Shomer Shabbos, dude. One. That's it. When people say, are you going back? Well, I mean, technically speaking, because when we say every year at Passover, next year in Jerusalem, yeah, and it's when you were a slave in the land of Egypt. Not we, you. So yes, in a sense, it's, are you going to go back? Well, I mean, yes. In a sense, I can say I can go back to Africa too if you want, because that's where we're all from, but yes, but I was born in Montreal, but I will be a Jew no matter where I am in the world. No matter how I pray or how I don't pray. No matter how much bacon I eat. I will always be a Jew. And I'm proud of that. I'm proud of the fact that Israel exists. There is nothing wrong with the right to self-determination. I said it earlier in the video. There's no Jew denying that Arabs can claim Saudi Arabia as their ethnic homeland. Sure, that's where the origin of the Semite race that you're part of is. Okay, yeah, cool. We're still Semite brothers and sisters at the end of the day. All right. Your religion? Okay. Your chosen religion, by and large, as a percentage, is Islam. All right. Well, I mean, majority of Jewish people practice Judaism. There are Muslim Jews out there. Cat Stevens. Islam is a faith. Mecca and Medina exist. The Al-Aqsa Mosque exists. We don't deny it. Find me where we do. But we can't have this sliver of land as our ethnic and religious homeland. It's not part of the Roman Empire. I hate to break it to you. Sorry. I won't acknowledge the colonialism of the Roman Empire as an origin story for what's now called Palestine. It doesn't exist. I will not attribute this land to a Roman slur based on its colonization. Sorry, that's just a historical truth, and I'm not going to abide by that. At least Canada, the name Canada, pays homage to First Nations. That is the origin of our name. If I am not mistaken, there is a small place in Ottawa called Canada, where the Ottawa Senators play, that people are like, I gotta go to Canada. Sound familiar? Canadians openly acknowledge that we did not acknowledge treaties. So we're trying to rectify that. One of the ones where I live, I tell you at the beginning of this video, I told you I live in Marmor, Ontario. One of the biggest cities in all of Canada, believe it or not, is Belleville. Belleville is the closest city I can go to. Peterborough's second. Again, two very big cities in the scope of Canada. But not far from Belleville is Mohawk territory. Now, there has been a land claim and treaty that's gone ignored for pretty much since colonization. Well, back, I want to say it was in 2020, where finally Canada recognized the borders of that treaty that were practical to today, because in essence, it would have taken over all of Belleville as well. But essentially what it is are hundreds of hectares of land that are now acknowledged as Mohawk territory that stretch along the St. Lawrence, if I'm not mistaken, all the way down through basically to Belleville. That's a significant amount of land acknowledgement. It was like, can we get Belleville? Look, guys, there's a lot of suburbs in Belleville. Okay, we're sorry. There's only so much we can do. We are not evicting Belleville. All right? It's just not going to happen. What can we do? We're in the process of doing that. Israel was afforded its native land after millennia of expulsions and attempts at destruction and eradication. So once it's reformed in its modern state, and again, it's grown only because of wars that happened after 1948. You say go back to 1967 borders. There's only another war that we happened to win because, oh yeah, they all wanted to kill us. There's just so many historical fallacies that are easy to debunk, or your blind spots that are so convenient based on your religious or political ideology. Like, it's a historical fact and truth. All these things I've said today are just truths. You don't have to like the Israeli government. But guess what? What they're doing right now with the judiciary is going to apply to any future government. Precedent. They are trying to establish a precedent for balance between government and judicial oversight. And while there are core values that branch of government and judiciary abide by, there's no binding document. There's no Charter of Rights that Canada has. And again, I said it earlier, Canada, our Charter of Rights only dates back to 1981. That is when it got final royal assent. We all agreed this is a good one. All right, we're good. 1981 it took us. Israel doesn't have one of those yet. That's probably a more pragmatic solution. Let's settle on a charter first, shall we? Well, it takes time. Look, we argue about Talmud all the time. Can't argue about this. It's important for modern statehood. Okay. And yes, you could be concerned about the government. Well, that will be a concern for any government. Because once there's a document and there's the law and you have precedent, well, that's the biggest political argument in Israel right now, other than the obvious. It's taken a back seat for the obvious. Have that discussion. Go ahead. Right? You want context or the fullness of the discussion? You might not have even known that. Yeah, look at what's going on prior to October 7th and the Netanyahu government in there. Yeah, there's no charter for anybody. How about start there? Yeah. Objectivity can still have room for comment, by the way. Right? The judicial can't just sit there and say, no, we should have all the power. We're good for it. I know I'm a champion of the law, but there still can be oversight. Power doesn't just people. I had a small interruption there. Don't know why. Anyway, I've covered some domestic issues that maybe a North American or Western audience wasn't familiar with. And here, wait a minute, what? There's some objective truths that I can maybe base a more broad opinion on? Yeah, there are. That's the domestic one. That's the biggie that everyone was. Oh, the judicial reform and okay, well, I mean, keep debating about it. Israel's a democracy. That's why there are protests for and against in the streets of Tel Aviv and Jerusalem, all throughout Israel. You can protest. And at no protest are they saying death to Arabs and death to the dozens of other countries around it about the judicial reform or having a pride parade where you can't have that in any neighboring Arab or Muslim majority country. Again, in Israel. Again, all these obvious bones of contention these organizations seem to have with Israel, I say bones of contention, just outright hatred towards Israel and the Jewish people. It's obvious. And when you state it to them, they give you this blank stare and then still try to justify and say another buzzword or sensational term that has no real basis. If you're going to use a word, use it. Fine. But back it up. Where's the genocide? There is none. It doesn't meet the definition. I'm sorry. It just doesn't. The ethnic cleansing. What ethnic cleansing? They want to wipe us out completely. From the river to the sea is no Jews, no Israel. That's genocidal and ethnic. That's our homeland. Sorry. It's as native to us as it is to any Native American or First Nations. And we're not disputing that. The devil's in the details, unfortunately, with these treaties. And I already alluded to that. So if you're going to draw those comparisons, go right ahead. But nobody is ignoring the land claims of our North American First Nations and Native Americans. So why is Israel up for debate? Shouldn't be. It is both the ethnic and religious homeland of the Jewish people. It has every right to exist. You're going to say, well, doesn't Gaza and the West Bank, didn't it really exist in the first place? Even prior to Israel having Gaza, it was Egyptian territory. Okay, give it back to the Egyptians then. All these arguments that people have against Israel, some are fair and easy to even have a fair discussion about. But when there are open calls of genocide, sorry, here in Canada, your charter rights don't protect you. So where's our protection based on clause number 1? Hasn't been there. Why do Jews in Canada not feel safe? Well, you're using clause number 1 for truckers, but not for Jews? Oh no, the truckers giving out Tim Hortons. Oh no, the cops in Toronto delivering Tim Hortons to people who are literally chanting for our extermination. That's not an easy one to look at, by the way. That really hits home a lot, for me personally at least. You'll deliver coffee to people who are calling to kill me, but we had a state of emergency for people in hot tubs without a protest permit. That was their biggest fault. That was their biggest crime. Yeah, you can compare the two. Store owners felt harassed. Were you firebombed? No? Okay. Well, they were loud. The horns were loud. Yeah, and once there was an injunction and the horns stopped during business hours, they can honk their horns all day. Sorry. Noise is noise. It was artificial. It was a protest. Jews aren't particularly thrilled with the chance of genocide, but they're still happening. So how do you think we're feeling in Canada? Do you think we're feeling protected? We saw what happened a few months ago, and it is fair because it's the interpretation of the Charter and its enforcement. Jews aren't feeling safe, and we didn't even feel safe before that domestically. We have been number 1 in religious and, some will say not really racial, but we've been number 1 on the hate list for the RCMP and FBI year in and year out disproportionately. For such a small percent of the population facing over 60% of those crimes, people want to cry about Islamophobia? Well, I could do a whole video on that. But I think it's appropriate to cut it off now. I've gone through my background where I feel as though I'm qualified to comment on these matters, my education, my Jewish identity. Yeah, I'm ticking the boxes because you have to, right? That's obligatory these days. But also what's obligatory is giving credit where it's due in the description. Again, the Israeli perspective and a lot of in-depth history about the land is attributed to traveling Israel. Oren's been fantastic as an ambassador. And again, he's not a Trumper. Right? He's not a representative of the Netanyahu government. He's an Israeli citizen who gives a very honest description on the ground. Here I am, though, in Canada, and trying to give historical context, perhaps some historical notes that you haven't heard traditionally. I am trying to obey the objective tenets of my degree in radio and television. I'm trying to do right by Mr. Bowles, who taught me to try and not use sensational language, to use actual real information to try and paint the accurate picture that it is. If you want to dispute the points, again, go ahead in the comments, if anybody ever comments on these things. And if you don't, great. If you do, great. Now you get along with my day now. I hope this has added some perspective for you, some historical context, some understandings of some complexities that weren't really that complex. And that maybe if I feel inspired to talk about Israel again, if it's relevant or applicable, whatever, what have you, I will. You can click subscribe. I guess you get notices about that. I know you do, depending on your settings. I'm not asking you to join. I'm not going to make money off of this thing. You want to share? Go ahead and share. Just keep the point. I've tried not to make it personal here. If I have, I'm trying to play it back in my mind for the last 2 hours. I don't think I have. So I would just appreciate it if you afforded me that same courtesy and the Jewish community that courtesy, because we're really not feeling it. And that's self-evident from the population of Saskatoon and greater calling for our death. Well, it's great that we have the population of North Bay on our side. It's really nice. It's still not the population of Saskatoon. And no, Jews are not going to be running back there. Israel's our native, ancestral, religious homeland. Used to sign off with this, so I guess it's appropriate in this context. Until the next time, may the Schwartz be with you.